In this tutorial, we will be creating the Vectric Widget, a design part which we'll need to bring together our basic drawing tools and some of our more advanced drawing tools together so that we can create the different elements of this design. So let us start by creating a new project. We'll start by setting this as a single side job with a width of 9 inches, a height of 9 inches, and a thickness of 1/4 inch. We'll set the Z0 position to the material surface, and the XY datum position will be in the bottom left corner. So we'll just click OK, and that will bring up our drawing panel ready for us to get started. I now want to create a particular shape which has been pre-designed, which I will use the Polyline tool for. Now, I know that for this design I want to start my line at 4.5 in the X axis and 8 in the Y. I can click Add, and this will create my first point here at those coordinates in the job. I now know that I want to create a line in positive X relative to that of 3.5 inches long, which I can just type into the form here at dx, which is the relative X position, and click Add for a 3.5 inch long line in X. Next, I know that I want a line that is 7 inches long in negative Y from that position. So I will be able, in this case, to use the 7 key on the keyboard. I press 7 and return the Enter key, and that creates a line for me there. Next, I want to have a similar 7-inch line going along an X, which I can then press 7 and return once more. Now I need to have a line that is 3.5 inches long in Y, and for this I can snap to halfway up the job, and there we go. You can see there it says L 3.5 next to my cursor to indicate that I am in fact 3.5 inches long. Next, I need to make an angled line at 38 degrees with length 1, which I can use in the form here to easily get a perfect angle of 38 and a length of 1 inch. So now I can click Add, and that has created my line for me. And then I want one more line of 1.5 in length in Y. And as you can see here, 1.5 on the screen next to my cursor. And then finally, to complete this, I need to close the line. I could go and click on the end point there, and that would close the line for me. Or another option is just press the Tab key on your keyboard, and that will close the line for you, finishing this part. Now that I've completed the basic outline of the shape, I now need to round the corners of it so that it fits my final design. To do this, I can use the Fillet tool, as seen here. Now, with this tool, you want to start off by defining the radius of the fillet you want. In my case, I want a 1/2 inch, and then you can choose your fillet type. In this case, I will be using the normal fillet, as this will help me round corners easily. Now that this is set up, all I need to do is go around the shape and hover my mouse over a corner. When it is successfully identified a corner, you'll see that there's a little tick next to the icon there. And when I click, it will round off the corner with a 1/2 inch radius for me. I can then continue to move around the shape, clicking each corner and allowing it to round them for me. Now I can close off that form. Now that we have the basics of our part, we would normally then proceed on to complete the rest of it with the internal design features. However, there has been a change of plan in the original design, and we need to make some adjustments before we continue. In this situation, what we want to do is move this vertical line here over to the right slightly, by 19/32 of an inch. To do this, we would need to remove this from the part, shift it over and reconnect it. So what we can do here is undo our fillets. First of all, open the fillet tool again. Without changing the radius, move your mouse over where the fillet is, and as you can see, instead of a tick, we now have an X. This is to indicate that it will remove the fillet when we click and put it back to a sharp corner. We can do this in both the corners of this line to give us back our original line. Close the Fillet tool And then using the node editing tool, we click on this, move across, and we can now click on our part, and it'll indicate all of the nodes of the vectors. We want to detach this straight line from the rest of the part. So we hover over the node here, right click, and select Cut Vector. This will now break it apart so that now these two nodes are both in the same position. I'll undo that though. And now if I move down, I can now hover over this one. And in this case, I can also use the shortcut key for C to cut it. Now we have a single vector on its own that is separated from the remaining part. Now that we have created our separated line, we can now click on it and select it, and then start to move it across. And we want to move it in this direction. So with this smart snapping line visible here on the screen, I can now type in 19/32 and press enter, and we can now see it has been moved for us that exact distance. We now want to reconnect it to the rest of the design. I'll open up node editing once again, and now I can drag this line straight up until it intersects with the point above it. And as you can see, Smart Snapping has put it at the correct length for me. I can then do the same for this line here to move it until both points now coexist on the same spot. And now for the point at the bottom, we can also use the features of Smart Snapping to grab the point, move it across, while still holding it and hovering over this point. We have now identified that as a Smart Snap point. We can now move up here, and as you can see, it's found the adjacent line so that we can now drop there, and it is now perfectly in line with this. And by likewise pulling this across, we can now link them back up together. We can right click to disable the node editing mode to put us back into a normal position. Now that we have our parts put together, we want to now join them into a single vector, because as you can see, they are still two separate vectors. So to do this, I can use Ctrl-A to select all of the vectors currently in the workspace. And now, if I come across to the Join Open Vectors tool, I can now use this to start to join them. As you can see here, it tells us that the selected vectors have two open ones in the selected group. I'm using a tolerance of 0.004 of an inch. In this situation though, we can see here clearly that after it has done the join, we are going to have one single closed vector and no open vectors, which is what we want. So I just have to click Join to complete the operation. I can now close that form, and as you can see, we have a single closed vector, which is perfect for what we want. Now that we have corrected our design as per our instructions from our client, we can now reapply these fillets as before, just simply turning on this Create Fillets tool and selecting both corners, having indicated that we have the tick here to show that it is going to fillet our design. And now we can close that off and move on to the next point. The next part of the design calls for 1/4 of an inch drill holes in each of the three main corners of the design. So to do this, we can use our circle tool. We want to have a diameter of 0.25 for our circles, for our drill holes. And if we move our mouse over to each corner, you can see here that Smart Snapping has identified the center of the arc for each corner. So we can just click the mouse to create our circle, move across to find the next one, and again you can see it's found it for this corner. And then finally, moving up, can now find the corner here to create the last of the 3 points. Now we want to create the semicircular radius section out at the bottom here. And to do that, we can use our circle tool. And we want to have a diameter of 3.5 inches for our circle. And we can then move across, and using the mouse, we can identify the center point of this span, how the icon has changed here. And by clicking, I can create my circle. Now we want to select our main part, hold Shift, and select our circle. This has prepared us now to then use the Subtract tool to take a circular bite out at the bottom of our part, giving us this design here that we wanted. Now we want to create the rectangular features on the right hand side of our product. We can do this using the rectangular tool. And in this situation, we want the anchor point to be the bottom right hand corner, and the width of this was going to be 2 plus 3/8, and press the equals key to give us 2.375, and the height of this rectangle will be 0.75. I'm not going to click create. Instead, what I'm going to do is move my mouse across, hover over this bottom line, hover over this vertical line, and then move through the intersection point of those, and the software correctly identifies that as a snapping location. And by clicking, I can now create my rectangle here. I can close off this form, and now I know that I need to move this up by 1.5 inches. So I can select it, start dragging it up the y-axis, and then type on the keyboard 1.5 and press the enter key, and it is now moved up for me. Now I need to create copies of this, perfectly spaced from each other, and to do this I can use the array tool. Clicking this to open the form, I'm going to want only a single column of them, but I want 4 rows of them. I want them to be have a gap of 375, so I can enter that in here. And then I don't want them grouped, so I shall just click copy. And that has created my duplicates of all 4 of them in total. Let us close off this form. We can now make our vertical rectangle, which will house our text as the next part. So I shall open the rectangle tool, and I now need to make sure that it is as tall as this point here in the top corner of this rectangle, and as low as this point here in the bottom of this rectangle. To do this, I can start selecting here. It will snap to the corner of this rectangle. I'll start dragging it out, and then I shall move my mouse down to here to snap to the bottom corner of this rectangle. And as I move my mouse across this way, I know that what I want is a 0.75 inch wide rectangle. So I shall use the on-screen display next to the mouse there, the width x 0.75, which is exactly what I want. I'll release the mouse, and we have our rectangle. Now we can close out of that tool. However, now I want to move this rectangle vector to be perfectly within the center of this larger design. So while holding the shift key, I will select the larger vector so that it is selected second, and now I shall use the align tools over here in the drawing panel. I want to align to the selection, and the last item in the selection is going to be my target. I want it centered in the x-axis, and by clicking this, it is now perfectly centered for me where I want it to be. Now that we have that aligned, we can close out this form and begin to create our text. We can use the text tools here in the drawing panel, and in this situation I want to select my rectangle and then use the draw text within a box. This opens up, and I want to change my font to a single line font, Helvetica single line. The width is going to be the same as the box that I have selected, and likewise the height. The margin size defaulted to normal, and in this case I'm just going to enter my text, which will be Vectric Widget. You can see now the text has been created here. However, what we want is it to be set vertically instead of horizontally. So at the moment, what we want to do is going to change the dimensions of the bounding box to match the rectangle that we are targeting this for. So width is going to be 3 inches and height is going to be 0.75 inches, and that is now going to be perfectly sized. We can now close out the text tool, and with our text selected, on the keyboard we can press the 0 key a couple of times to rotate this automatically around its natural center. With the text created, we now want to work on the small hatched area to the side here. Part of this is going to use an offset line around the edge. So we can select our vector here, use the offset tool here, and we want to offset inwards by 1/4 of an inch. So we shall enter 0.25 and select new, and then we click offset, and as you can see here, it has created a new line for us to work from. Now, to create the left and right edges of this hatched area, we shall use a simple line drawn, which I will align with this side here, and just for convenience I will snap to the corner here, and then make it as tall as the project over here to create our vertical line. We want to offset this one 1 inch to the right. Now, when you're working with an open vector, to determine left and right, you want to position yourself on the start node, which you can identify here. And so if you're standing on that point looking along the vector, we know that we want to move it to the right to make it move across in X this time. We'll move it across 1 inch, and we want to delete the original. So we'll click offset, and our new created line appears here. We now want another line to create the other side of the hatched area. So we shall not delete the original this time, and we will create another offset of 1.5 to give us both our edges of this design. We'll close off the Offset Vectors tool. We can now use the Interactive Trim tool to begin to remove sections of these lines that we no longer want. In this situation, we will just start snipping away to remove all of the unwanted parts. There we go, I will just remove those. If you make a mistake, however, Ctrl Z to undo at any time. There we go, just going to remove the remaining parts. And here we go, we have our perfectly designed section with an offset from the edge that is perfectly even all the way around. I'll also use this opportunity to clean up this corner here, which is going to suffer from the same issue. There we go. We can close our interactive trim tool, select this remaining line that we no longer want, and press delete to remove it. Now we want to create the vectors for the actual hatching, which we can use with a simple polyline tool, and we can just draw it straight onto the design, and we'll work from the top here to keep it in line with everything. A 45-degree angle is what we're looking for, and we want to make sure that it extends past this side here so that we can then trim it away later as we need to. So we've got our single line there, close the polyline tool, and now we'll use the array to make a copy of this. We're going to need quite a few of them, so I'll do 40 copies, and we'll have an offset, I think, of 0 and minus 0.2, so that the copies are created down rather than up. When I click copy, you can see we have all of our copies created here. We can close off the array copy tool now, and now to create a hatching, rather than repeat that process, what we can do is we'll go to the mirror selected objects, and then we want to create a mirrored copy, and then with the flip about job center turned off, we want to make sure we flip horizontally so it flips about its own center. And there you see we have our hatching has been created. Now we can close the mirror tool, and now what I want to do is select all of our lines together. To do this, I'm just going to click and drag a box from the bottom corner up, and then use the Shift key to unselect the parts we no longer want. We can then right click them and group objects so they'll now easily act together without having to reselect all of them individually. We now want to make sure that they are aligned with this internal part here. So again, holding Shift, we will click on this to make it the last selected item, and then use the Align Selected Objects tool, and again align to selection, this time the center, and the hatching is now perfectly aligned over the center of our internal shape. We can now close that off. Now with all that selected, we can now come to Trim Objects, and with the Clear Outside Boundary selected, we can now click Clear, and our hatching is now perfectly contained within our outside edge. We'll close that off. This gives us our completed design. So what we'll do, we will now center that. We can now save our project by going to File, Save As, and then give it our project name, which in this case is Vectric Widget, and click Save. In this situation, we have an existing file already, and we want to replace it. So yes, this removes the old file and creates a new one with our new design inside. In this project, we have used a number of simple tools to create a more complex part, using offsets to create these edges, creating circle vectors in the corners, using fillets to round off sharp edges, using the Polyline tool to create our basic outline to begin with, using the Array tool to create our groups of rectangle vectors here, the Text tool for this text section in the middle here, rotated 90 degrees, and then the Array tool, the Trim tool, and the Scissors tool to create our hatching vectors here, and then clean them up to leave only the parts we want. Thank you very much for watching this Vectric tutorial, and we'll see you in the next one.